Hello and a very warm welcome to the Rocking the Journey podcast. Today in our series on inspirational women, I'm really delighted to be joined by Professor Pam Kearns. Now, I first met Pam when I was working campaigning for better treatments for children with cancer, and was, as I was just saying to Pam before we started recording, really impressed by the way that she led in a field which, coming from a journalist newsroom background, I found pretty bruising. So Pam, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So first of all, explain to me, Pam, exactly what your role is, because I was looking on, trying to do the research on you, and I thought, is she a medical researcher? Are you a pediatric oncologist? So explain to me.
Well, I guess I've got so many different hats and I have to sometimes remember which hat I'm wearing where. But yes, I'm a trained paediatric oncologist. So what that means is I trained as a paediatrician first and then specialised in oncology. And that means that I work in a hospital. I work at the Birmingham Children's Hospital and I look after children with a range of different types of cancers, particularly what we call the solid cancers. Not so much the brain tumours. I've got other specialists that are interested in the brain tumours. So that's my kind of day job, what I trained to do. Halfway through my training, I stepped out to become a scientist. I went and did a PhD and was doing research looking at drug development. That's how I got interested in that field. And then my career has kind of gone in parallel. So I've continued being a doctor all the way through, doing clinical work, but have focused on areas of research. And as I've progressed in my career, I guess the balance has gone more and more to research, although once you're a doctor, it's really hard to ever let go. And I couldn't bear not continuing doing the clinical work. So now I do less clinical work than I used to do, but I still go to the hospital to see my patients. But the rest of the time I'm in with my lab group. I've got people working in the laboratory, or the area of research that I've got most interest in is clinical trials. And I work with people who develop and design clinical trials.
Now, I'd really like to pick up one issue I'd like to talk about today is resilience, and but we're going to go to that in a minute. But I think being a doctor dealing with children with cancer is an amazing role and just needs buckets full of grit and resilience. So I'd really like to talk to you more about that. But first of all, I want to take us back to Pam as a little girl and what she wanted to do and what were the messages she got from the people around her.
Well, that's a really interesting question. So what did I want to do? I wanted to be a ballerina. That was my great ambition in life. But my mother wanted me to be a doctor. I mean, for as long as I can ever remember. And I don't come from a medical family. My dad was an engineer. My mum was a housewife, but for reasons I've never understood, she just wanted me to be a doctor. So it was there being drip fed all the way for as long as I could remember. But actually, seriously, I wanted to be a scientist. And I kind of defied my parents by going to university to study science. I went to do physiology at Aberdeen University, and I graduated with an honours degree there. And started to do research, which was, that was kind of my career ambition. And then I was doing research looking at electrical signals in the brain, looking at how visual pathways work. And I had, kind of like light bulb moment of, why am I doing this? I don't understand even the question here. I actually want to understand what it was that drove the research questions. And I went back to medical school. To my mother's delight, I have to say, I got the absolute parental "I told you so." Days before it was more popular, I was a graduate entry into medical school, and I haven't looked back since then.
So do you think there was anything, was it really your mother's kind of idea that anything was possible? Because I guess we're kind of a similar age, and I know my mother, coming from a medical background, but Irish, was absolutely adamant, you're not going to be a nurse, because, and fantastic, obviously, and sometimes I wish I had gone into medicine, but that was all that was open to women of her generation. So she was so ambitious for me. do you feel that was something about your mother too? Or?
Oh, absolutely. She was incredibly ambitious for me. I think there's, my mum was German and very driven lady. She had quite an interesting life herself, but perhaps didn't maximise all the opportunities. You know, she was brought up during the war and things didn't happen in the way she wanted them to. So I think she just wanted the best for me. But nothing was ever quite good enough for her. You know, my childhood was always, you know, I'd come home delighted with a 95% score and she'd go, and what happened to the other 5%? And it wasn't unpleasant, you know, it was just, that was her way. You know, you have to be the best you can be, and she kept striving. And I do remember, you know, before she died, you know, we had those kind of conversations you have at the end of people's lives, and she said, I didn't mean to be hard on you. She said, I just wanted to do the best you could with your life. And I know she was very proud of what I achieved in the end. My dad was quite the other way. He was absolute typical English gentleman, thought bringing up the children was all my mother's job, but he just wanted me to be happy. And I think whatever I'd have done, he was the perfect balance. And mum was the one that drove everything, and he was the one going, as long as you're happy.
Now, so one thing going into medicine, and I was just looking at some stats beforehand, couldn't find the stats on medicine, but it is 7% of the world's leaders are women, 7% of women CEOs in Fortune 500 are women, but 60% of graduates are women. So they're interesting statistics, aren't they? So yeah. What is happening, or are we just seeing more women are going to come through and it's all going to be kind of much better and more equal in the future? But there seems to be this kind of cliff in, and looking at the research across nearly all occupations, that at entry level, there's lots of women and they tail off kind of, and by the end of it, there's very, very few women in senior positions.
Yeah, no, you're right, Debbie. In my sort of medical career, the shift towards women as medical students has been massive. You know, we were definitely the minority when I was at medical school.
Right.
And now, you know, medical students, female medical students are in the majority. But as you say, as you go through the ranks, and I don't have the figures to hand, but you definitely see that fall off as you go higher in your career, and particularly in academia. The female clinical academics, the statistics of when you shift from being a junior researcher to then getting a tenured post as a senior lecturer and then going up to becoming a professor, it really is a falling off the cliff. And you know, there's been a lot of push within medical academia, particularly driven by Dame Sally Davies, because she said, you know, when she set up the NIHR, she inspired the Athena Swan movement, which was to encourage women or encourage institutions to make sure women had the right opportunities to be able to develop their careers. So not saying that you should be any less than a man in terms of your academic ability, but the opportunity should be there. And that is starting to impact now, and I really do mean starting. It's not a level playing field yet.
So I was listening to Radio 4 last week, fantastic Women's Hour, was talking about these PhD students working in the vaccines for coronavirus. And they were saying how hugely difficult, how aggressive, competitive the whole environment was, perhaps rightly so. But one woman was saying when she was writing her PhD thesis, her senior lecturer said to her, put yourself in the shoes of an American man. And I thought that was just probably a glib comment, but seemed to say so much to me, that kind of what we're expecting from people.
Yeah, I think that says a lot about her supervisor, actually. You know, you do not need to put yourself into the mindset of an American man to succeed, but unfortunately, that kind of old-fashioned perception still exists. And I do, I mean, the university where I'm at the moment, Birmingham, I think is doing a lot to try and get rid of that kind of attitude, but it is still there. You know, it's there in the unconscious bias as well as the conscious bias. It's both there. So it's got to be a competitive environment. We want the best. We want the best academics, but you shouldn't be disadvantaged by just because you're a woman, or because of the fact that you want to have a family, for example, and you have a career break because of that. We need to have a working environment that embraces that and allows people to still succeed, maximize their brilliance, but not be disadvantaged because you've taken some time out to do what is completely natural.
So with your career, take me through it. Take me through the kind of what it has meant to you personally, what the cost is of getting to really probably kind of on the highest levels that you can get to. What does that maybe cost is the wrong word, but what has that involved? What you've needed to give to do that?
Yeah, there are consequences, definitely. I mean, I don't have children, and that was a very conscious choice during my career path. I was very driven, you know. I've always known that when I want to do something, it takes a lot of focus, and that you can't do it half-heartedly. And you know, again, I'm sure this comes from my upbringing, but you always have to be the best at what you do. Right. And so I never did anything by half measures. And just to say, no, I didn't think, oh, I won't have a family so I can succeed. Yeah. But at the points in my career where I had to be really focused on what I was doing, particularly in terms of research and going into my PhD, to have then taken a career break, I know would have been a negative step, because I'd had to stop that kind of drive and moving forward. And so I just didn't. Now, the stars didn't align. I didn't meet the right man with whom I'd want to have a family at that time. I was with somebody, but yeah, fortunately, we didn't have a family because we didn't stay together. But I've often reflected, had I had a different career path, would I have had children at that stage? And I think the answer is probably no. It's just not me. But I do know that not having a family and all that would have taken in terms of time, and you know, you can't pretend that the family is not going to impact on your time. It would have made a difference to the way I progressed in my career. So when you say, you know, did you give something up? I think it's probably fair to say that I did. I chose to take the career path that I did. Now, am I happy? Yes, I've got a fantastic life and I've got a great husband, and you know, and I don't miss having a family. But to get to where I am in the time that I did, I had to be focused.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Now tell me, Pam, because it's one thing I don't think I've ever asked you actually, but I don't know how somebody goes to work every day, having lost a child to cancer, and been in a hospital for a couple of years, really, on and off, that how you cope with dealing with children who have these, and sometimes hopefully often get better, but sometimes don't. How do you do that every day?
Yeah, I remember when I was training, my first ever experience of a child who had reached that point was quite clear that she wasn't going to survive. And my consultant came in and had a conversation with the family that evening, because time was clearly going to be short. She deteriorated very rapidly. And it was, you know, by the time we'd finished the conversation, it was the early hours in the morning. And I walked with him out of the hospital and I said to him, how do you cope with this? And he said, you have to find something that helps you cope. I'm going to go for a run now. Now, it sounded like a glib comment, but actually it made me realize that you do need a coping mechanism. You're inhuman if you say that it doesn't affect you. And even now, you know, all these years later, and I've seen, you know, both the joy and the sadness of being a pediatric oncologist. And I still, when I have to break bad news, or I, you know, go through a journey with a family where their child dies, it still breaks my heart every single time. But you have to find a way of dealing with it. And you know, I don't know if it's because of my original consultant. I do it by, you know, either going out for a ride or a run or somewhere I just get my headspace back again. But also the one thing that I remind myself, and that when I'm in that headspace, is it wasn't my child. Whatever I feel, it's nothing compared to what that family is going through. And that is what helps me go forward, because, you know, you can't wallow really in that that emotion when you know that you can't have even the slightest idea how bad it is for that family.
Yeah.
And I think that's what helps me cope.
Yeah.
But also, you know, the other side of it is doing the research that I actually genuinely believe that what I'm doing might make a difference in the future.
Yeah. So just on the research, because an area that really, really interests me, and I was thinking about kind of talking to you today about the two areas that really interest me are female leadership and how that might be, and how leadership generally may be changing, as maybe just listening to the Wreath lecture by Mark Carney last week about this kind of idea of more collaboration and more kind of value-based leadership. And that really struck me of when I got my first glimpse of medical research and was pretty horrified. I think I've said this to you before, at the kind of lack of collaboration, what I saw, the lack of collaboration between institutes, between people. And I just wondered, is there a link between a very kind of hierarchical, male-dominated field and competition, and so not so much collaboration, and whether that is having a negative effect on progress in this area? It's an area that interests me.
I think it's changing. You know, the research is, or certainly medical research, but probably all research is in a slightly odd environment, because we definitely have shifted to more team science, you know, more collaborative research, bringing together interdisciplinary research. It's amazing what you can learn from a different specialty, you know, a different area of science or even social sciences, to improve the work that you're doing. But then we're at the moment in something called the research assessment framework. You know, this is how universities get evaluated on their performance, and therefore the funding that comes from the government back to the universities. And the way that evaluation is done is very individual. So it's whether your papers and your contribution to the papers are in the highest impact journals. So you go from a position of wanting to collaborate, build up big teams, all working together. But then you have to publish that you're the senior author, the first author in the highest impact, in competition with the people you're trying to collaborate with. So the metrics are wrong, you know. So I think, and every, you know, 5 years, these assessments come round, and suddenly everybody starts thinking, oh, well, actually, I need to be the lead author. I need to be better than you in order to have a better position on the paper, so that it's my paper. So I think that needs to shift in the future to get genuine team science, and in between everybody gets on and starts collaborating again. But it is you know, and it is that very highly competitive environment that I think women do suffer in, not because they're not clever enough to be competitive, but it's just overall not in their nature. And I spent a lot of time in the last year talking to women in our institute about promotions. And I feel very passionately that everybody should start thinking very early in their career about the building blocks they need to put in place in order to make the next step in their career, whichever direction they're going in. And they need to be advised. And, you know, you start to see forms filled in by you know, different people. And there is a constant theme in the ones that come from women of, they write, we did this, we did that, and almost apologetic for their successes. And that is something that you almost need to train women to do, to say it is okay to say that achievement was your achievement, and actually you're very good at that, and you have to train it into women. And I say that from the heart, because I know I'm exactly the same, and you know, nobody really gave me that advice, and I now want to impart that advice onto other people, that they need to learn that.
About you, that you do come across as, and I've seen you in action, as a very compassionate, very considered kind of person. And I just wondered how you've managed to get through all these things. Have you had to kind of make yourself a different kind of person, put on a mask? What has enabled you to get through these kind of hurdles?
You know, I've never put on a mask. You know, I am who I am, and that doesn't mean it has always gone well. You know,
Oh, do tell.
I've had over the years experiences of male behaviour that has been quite frankly unpleasant, and I know I've had to learn to deal with it. I can tell you a story which I think is actually quite funny, but also quite telling. So when I was a junior doctor, I've always, I've never dressed the part. I dress what makes me feel happy, and I've always had a passion for mini skirts, as you know.
I do.
And I can remember turning up on as a junior doctor in a district general hospital, in my usual, sort of long boots, mini skirt jumper that I was known for, and this not so young doctor turned, same grade by the way, wasn't senior to me, dressed me down, telling me that I was so inappropriately dressed and I would never make a career in medicine, behave like that, dressing like that, and also told me that that I really wasn't suited to this career. And I took it as a challenge, I just thought, well, you may well think that, but I also know what kind of a person you are, and you don't understand anything about people, and that's what being a doctor's about. And I think that's what being a leader's about. It's really understanding people. So I've always stayed true to what I believe. I dress for myself, what makes me feel good, and I do. I've taken all my roles on the basis of, I believe in what I'm doing is correct, and I have quite a principled approach, and I'm quite quiet. You'll never see me rant and rave about anything, but I will stick to my guns on things, so that if I'm in a meeting, or if I believe something has to be done a certain way, I guess my style of leadership has never been to sort of stamp my feet or, raise my voice, but I'll be very firm that that's the way I want it done.
Yeah.
And I think it is possible to lead well that way. You don't have to be theatrical about it, and you don't have to be aggressive, but if you can show, almost like lead by example, and say, this is how I want it done, and this is how I do things, it seems to work. I mean, it's the way I've always approached things. I think there's, everybody has a different leadership style, and I used to look at people who were the more kind of well, I suppose it is theatrical leaders, the ones that can really, inspire with great speeches. And I think, I wish I could do that. But then I've realised that is never going to be me. That I'd much rather just give examples about how I would do things in my way. Yeah. But I also think you need to listen to people. And I think the worst thing that happens in leadership is where people aren't actually listening to the people that they're trying to look after. Because no leader gets it right all the time, and if you're not listening to what people want, you'll go off in some wild direction. Yeah.
So what would your advice be for a young woman listening to this, thinking, I quite like a career in medicine? What would you tell her?
Well, I definitely say do it. I think it's the best job. I think I get really saddened when I hear people say, oh, don't do it, it's really hard. The NHS is a really hard environment now to work in, but it is the most rewarding career. Yeah. I think they should go into it with their eyes open. Yeah. It is hard work. The hours are quite long. They are better than they used to be, fortunately. They're a lot more reasonable now, but it is still, it is an emotional commitment as well. Yeah. But I would say just stay completely true to yourself, and you will take knocks. People will say things to you that can be really unpleasant, and you can take them to, it's very easy to take them to heart. Mine, you can be quite sensitive, and you can take minor criticisms, or sometimes quite major criticisms, and then dissolve under them. But actually, just to my mind, you should go home and think about it. Think, was that a realistic criticism? Am I like that? Or was that just somebody whose opinion is really misplaced, and that isn't me? And really, and then if you really, you need to build a belief in yourself, and then stay true to who you are.
Yeah, fantastic. Lovely advice. Thank you very much for that. So now you're at an age, does retirement come into the picture, or never?
Yeah, no, it does actually. I often, my husband and I go for long walks and talk about what we're going to do in retirement, and we were talking about it quite seriously till I took on my new role, and he said, well, that's disappeared into the blue yonder now. So yeah, no, we've got plans for it when we retire. There's so many things that I want to do that I just don't have time to do now, but I'm just not ready for it yet. So, a few more years. But I think what's really important is that before retirement, and this is advice for anybody that ends up in the kind of role that I have, which is incredibly busy, and I know how busy my days are. But I always try to make sure I take some time out for myself and for, that I can spend with my husband, and just do something together once a week, to just unwind. And even if it's only for an hour, going for a walk or a cycle or something together, or watch a movie together, it's that hook that we've got until we both retire and spend all that time together. That's going to be a challenge.
Fantastic. So finally, we have two final questions that we ask all our guests. What's the best and the worst thing about the age you're at now?
That's a really good question. So the best thing, I think it's great that the wisdom that you've gained by this time, you really don't worry so much about things as you did when you were younger. So I think that probably is the best thing. A lot more confident I was than I was a neurotic teenager. Yeah. The worst thing, I sometimes, I see young people on the train, and I commute into work, and I do envy their lack of fear. As you get older, you worry about things, don't you? You're much more cautious, and I remember that, almost devil may care, nothing can touch you. Yeah, attitude that you have when you're in your 20s and even in your 30s, and I love that, and I wish I could capture that again, that not worrying about things so much.
And finally, what would you best like to be remembered for?
I'd like to be remembered. I think if people think well of me, that I've managed to make a difference to people's lives in some way or another, in a positive way, I think then I feel I've done something good with my life.
And are there certain children that you remember that you because you must, their purpose is just kind of so much part of your role. Are there those children you remember that would?
There are, all the way through my career, there are children that I have touched me. They all, I wouldn't say, that you have one more than another that touches you. They all do, but there are a few that have said things to you, or their behaviour, or the way they've coped with adversity, that really stay with you and come back to you quite a lot. Right back to the very first young teenager that I spoke to I was an SHO, who had just been told that she was dying. She had a cancer that was now incurable, and I remember sort of sitting on her bed, and I'd never faced a conversation like that before with a young teenager, and she said to me, "What do you think it's going to be like?" And we ended up just having a very, kind of casual conversation, but about a topic that you never imagined you'd be speaking to a young teenager about, let alone anybody, because as a junior doctor, you've not had that much experience about it either. And I do remember just this very open conversation, because I didn't know what death was like either, and we speculated together. And it's something that really, really stayed with me, is to stay open and honest with your thoughts and conversations with people. And then latterly in my career, there are so many young children who have survived cancer, and they stay in touch with me and they tell me what they're doing with their lives, and that means a huge amount. And there's one parent that I stay in touch with a lot, who set up a charity her child died of neuroblastoma, and she set up a charity to help families who'd lost children from any cause, not just from cancer. It's called A Child of Mine, and I'm a trustee for that charity. Wonderful. And you know, that's what I learned through talking to her about what it is to go through bereavement has stayed with me a lot.
As a wonderful charity, absolutely. So A Child of Mine, yeah. Pam, thank you so much. I know you're so busy, and thank you so much for talking to me today. And I wish you a very wonderful Christmas.
Thank you. It's been an honour and a pleasure, Debbie. Thank you.